Hello, my name is Emma, and today we will talk about suggest and recommend. What do these words mean? Well, suggest and recommend have the same meaning in English. Both mean that we use suggest or recommend when one person wants to tell someone else what they should do. We use suggest and recommend to give advice. Many learners of English make mistakes with these words. Let's look at an example of these mistakes. A common mistake is, "Can you suggest me?" Can you suggest me a good movie? And notice I put an X because it's a mistake. I will tell you why in a moment. We can see the same mistake with recommend. Can you recommend me a good English teacher? Again, this is a mistake. Why is it a mistake? Well, we do not use me after suggest. We do not use me after recommend. What do we use after these words? Well, there's 4 different possibilities. And in this video, we will look at each possible ending we can use after suggest or recommend. So I have here 4 sentences to show you what I mean. The first sentence, our teacher recommends that we read books. I can also say our teacher suggests that we read books. So one ending after suggest or recommend is a that clause. You will often see the word that after suggest or recommend. And we will talk about that in a moment. Another possible ending is we can say, our teacher recommends books to us, or our teacher suggests books to us. So I wrote the word here, books, but we can use a noun or a noun phrase after recommend and suggest. I will explain this in a moment. The third example that we can have that follows suggest or recommend is ing verbs. So we can have the word recommend or suggest, and the very next word is an ing verb. So our teacher recommends reading books. Our teacher suggests reading books. And the final thing that can follow suggest or recommend, the final end of the sentence, can be a WH question word. So that can be who, what, where, why, when, and how. So an example of this is our teacher recommends what books to read, or we can say our teacher suggests what books to read. So you'll notice recommend and suggest are often interchangeable. This means they have a similar meaning and we can use them both in the same way. So let's look at examples for each of these endings and talk a little bit more about each one. All right, so let's look at our first example of what can follow suggest or recommend. So I have up here the word that and a clause. So the word that often follows recommend or suggest. You might ask, what is a clause? Well, the main point of a clause is you have a subject and a verb in a clause. So you will have the word that, a subject like I, you, he, she, they, we, and then a verb after that. So we'll look at this in a little more detail. Here is an example sentence. I suggest that you, so this is our subject, bring that's our verb, a coat. I suggest that you bring a coat. We can also use the same structure with the word recommend. I recommend that she study. So one thing you will notice is we use subject pronouns here. So we use words like she. We do not use words like her or him. We use a subject pronoun, which is he, she, I. So that's something to keep in mind. Here is another example. I suggest he create a resume. But wait, where is that? Shouldn't there be a that there? Well, that's a great question. That is something we can put in, but it's optional. So sometimes especially in informal language, we won't even include the word that. It's your choice. So that's why I have that in brackets. Sometimes we include it, but it's not necessary. So if we wanted to look at this like a mathematical equation, we could say we have our subject, in this case I. We have our word suggest or recommend here. So I can just write that in, suggest or recommend. That, which I mentioned, is optional. And then we have our person word, which is our subject pronoun, I, you, he, she, they, we, and then a base verb. So what do I mean by base verb? Well, a base verb means that there is no conjugation. For example, bring. I could say, I bring, you bring, he bring, she bring. Notice we don't do anything to the verb. It's just in the base form. It's the same here. We have she study. We don't need to change the verb here. So let's look at some more examples. I suggest that he take our quiz. I've highlighted this because you'll notice there's no S. When we use a base verb form, in this case with suggest or recommend, you do not need to have an S for he or she pronouns. Let's look at another example. They suggest that. So here we can put a subject word. In this case, I'm going to put the word I. They suggest that I go. And again, go is in the base form. So this is one ending we can use when we are talking about the word suggest or recommend. We can use that and a clause afterwards. All right, time for a quick quiz. I have here a sentence with suggest, and I have different possible endings. So let's choose the correct ending. I suggest that. So what comes next? Do we use she or do we use her in this case? So remember, the second part is almost like its own sentence. So we would use the word she. So I'm going to circle that, she. And remember what I said about the verb? What verb form do we use when we have suggest that or recommend that? Do we say go, the base form, or goes, where we conjugate? In this case, we would use the base form. We would use go. So we would say, I suggest that she go. I suggest that she go to the mall. I recommend that she go to the mall. So the beautiful part about suggest and recommend is after that, we don't need to conjugate the verb. All right, well, so now let's look at the next example of what can follow recommend or suggest. So this is an easy example. After suggest or recommend, we can have an ing verb. So let's look at an example of this. I suggest studying English. So my verb here is study, and I add ing. Why? Because after recommend or suggest, we use ing verbs. I suggest studying English. Here's an example with recommend. I recommend, so we have our verb be. I recommend being careful online. So again, we have our ing. Let's look at or actually, before we get to the next example, I should mention that when we use a verb with ing, you'll notice that we don't have a person here. We don't mention the person. We're only mentioning the action in this case. You know who the person is based on the context. So I suggest studying English. The person likely is I'm suggesting that to you based off of this context. So let's look at another example, and this time I want you to try it. My friend recommends, and I have the verb here, take breaks. My friend recommends take breaks. So what do I need to do to this verb? If you said add ing, you are correct. So we can say my friend recommends taking, so take plus ing, breaks. So I'll just write that in here, taking breaks. I recommend getting a new marker. All right, well, let's look at the next example. She suggests. See, she suggests, and then we have here our verb, spend time in nature. So what do we need to do to the verb? If you said add ing, you are correct. She suggests spending time in nature. Okay, another quiz. True or false? We use me, him, her, and them after suggest that or after recommend that. So for example, I suggest that me go to the store. I suggest that him study English. I recommend that her learn English. So is this true or false? If you said false, you are correct. We do not use me, him, her, or them with suggest that. We use I, she, he, we, they after suggest that. All right, well, so now let's look at the third piece that might follow suggest or recommend. Suggest and recommend can be followed by a noun or a noun phrase. So a noun is a person, a place, a thing, or an idea. And a noun phrase is where you have maybe the word the plus a noun, a plus a noun, or maybe a number like 2 plus a noun. So let's look at some examples of this. So again, a noun or a noun phrase can come after the word suggest or recommend. Here's my first example. Can you suggest a good restaurant? In this case, we have the word a good restaurant. That's a noun phrase. And that can come right after suggest. We can also use the same thing with recommend. Can you recommend a good hotel? Can you recommend a place to buy a coat? Can you recommend a good movie? So these are all examples of a noun phrase. So you might be wondering, should I put the word me here? Can you recommend me a nice hotel? What happens if you want to recommend something to a person? Where do you put the pronoun or the person word? Do you put it before the noun, right after recommend or suggest, or do you put it after? If you said after, you're correct, but we need to use the word to as well. So nothing goes here. We can say, can you recommend, well, sorry, we should have the word a. Can you recommend a nice hotel to me? So if you wanted to use me, that's fine, but it has to come at the end with the word to. Can you suggest a good restaurant to me? Can you suggest a nice place to go to my parents? So the key here is you need the word to, and it comes at the end, and then you can have your object pronoun or your person word. All right. What time is it? It's time for another quiz. So I have here the sentence, can you recommend a movie? Now I want to put the word me here. How can I do this? Should I say, can you recommend me a movie? Or should I say, can you recommend a movie to me? Which is correct? If you said to me, you are correct. So we do not have the word me here. It does not follow recommend. It does not follow suggest. If we want the word me in this sentence, it comes at the end after the noun. The noun is the movie. So it comes after that, and we need the preposition to. We can put other words here. If we are talking about a man, we can say, can you recommend a movie to him? Can you recommend a movie to her? Can you recommend a movie to them? So with the word to, we can use him, her, me. These are some examples of what we can use with that. All right, well, so now let's look at the final item that can follow suggest or recommend. So far, we've covered that with a clause. We have covered nouns, and we have covered the verb ing. All of these can follow the word suggest or recommend. The final item that can follow suggest or recommend are WH question words and how. So we can use WH questions. What do these include? Where, what, when, why, who, and also how, which is considered a WH question word, even though it does not start with WH. So let's look at some examples of this. So the first one, could you suggest, so we have our word here, suggest, and notice the next word is a question word. Could you suggest where I might buy a coat? Could you recommend where I might find some tasty cuisine? So again, suggest, recommend, we can use them in the same way. They can be followed by a question word. Here's another example. Can anyone suggest how we should decorate our house? Can anyone recommend how we should decorate our Christmas tree? So again, we have our question word how. And you'll notice that right after how or where or these question words, we have a subject pronoun. So that's like words like I, you, he, she, they, we. Okay, so those are the 4 items that follow our words recommend and suggest. So what are you going to do now? The best thing to do is to study and to test yourself. We learn a lot by testing ourselves. So here is my recommendation. I recommend that you take our quiz. Where is our quiz? Well, it's at www.engvid.com. There you can take a quiz on what you've just learned about suggest and recommend. I suggest that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a lot of great grammar lessons, a lot of great information, including tips and tricks on how to learn English. So I recommend you check that out. So thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care.